So with the facial features all set, let's take a look at creating the hair using the same method. Now the hair is just a little different because the way I'm going to be treating it, a lot of it, I'm seeing it in my head. So when doing hair, I like to group it in chunks. So in your head, start kind of creating these shapes that represent the chunks of hair, because it's easier to chunk hair together and try to draw it that way than drawing each individual strand. So if you kind of clump them together, and I guess the best way would be grouping instead of clumping, because clumping sounds like you're forcing it, but grouping makes it sound more natural, like you're shaping it. And the way that we're going to be looking at it is we're going to look at these different shapes, and then we're going to shade it according to that shape, and then draw the individual strands on top of it to give the impression of hair. And we're going to be rendering it in a very fantastical way, where there's no very harsh direct light. Instead, we're going to give the impression of kind of an overcast lighting, where we're going to add shine based on the curve of the hair. So the curve area of the hair that I'm going to be lighting the most, I'll block out here. So in these two areas, I'm going to be adding most of the lighting that will be built up from the center, and then it'll kind of work its way outwards toward the natural color of the hair. And this gives the hair more shine, but it also gives it more of a 3D sense, where you're getting more form based on the way that the lighting is hitting the hair. So I'm going to go ahead and start clumping it together, or grouping it, as I should continue to call it from now on. So this is a new layer, and what I'm going to do is, the first thing I see that the hair color is kind of light, so I'm just going to darken up some of those back areas here, because I want the light that's going to be hitting the hair to be a lighter brown, so I want the base color of the hair just be a tad darker. And this goes back to my whole theory that once you place something, don't feel like it's set there forever. You can always draw on top of it. Okay, so then from here, I'm going to make my brush size smaller. And then I'm going to grab that dark brown that we used for the back set of the hair. And then I'm going to edge off the hair. Oop, that's not the dark one. There we go. So I'm just going to edge off this inside area here. Start to really give it that, cup, upside down cup shape to the actual hair. And since I want to see the impression of the ear as well, I'm just going to lightly draw that in. And I don't have to get super detailed with that, just kind of shows the viewer that the hair isn't covering the ear completely. The ear can be seen. And bring that up. There we go. So when I'm shaping it out, I usually like to start either from the root or the tip of the hair and then just kind of build it out. So I'm looking at adding in those different shapes that I was talking about when we're grouping it. So I'm still thinking in a shapely manner, where eventually this group of hair will look like a shape. So I gotta just edge it off to give the impression of the shape. And I also want it to feel like hair, so give it that natural buoyancy and the way that the gravity is going to be working against it to push it down, but it's still light enough where you get those individual strands hanging off or something like that. Or if it's styled, you got to make sure that it looks styled in a certain way. And then this is a great example where I can show you guys how, what if I want to show some of the skin coming through the hair itself. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab that skin color, make my brush a bit smaller, and then just draw literally right on top of the hair. And you can see how, for the most part, it just looks like you took a brush and drew over the hair. So then you got to grab that brush color again and make it feel like it should be there. So then I usually like to draw some kind of a drop shadow on the skin, just enough where it's not overbearing of a shadow, but enough where it does look like it's laying over the skin and it's casting just a bit of a shadow. Okay, so I'm going to go back to grabbing that dark color. Then I'm going to continue edging it out. So now when I get to the edges, this is where it's a bit more tricky because your lines are going to become much more seeable. And you want to be careful that you're not making it too defined where it becomes distracting. So rather, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to lightly give impressions of the edge of the hair. And then I could take my eraser tool, and then I'm going to make that small as well. And I'll just go through on the edging. But I want to make sure I'm on the Cecilia layer, because otherwise I'm erasing nothing. And just do a very soft erase. I don't want to do too much where I'm getting rid of the hair that we've already laid down, but just enough where there's more of an edging to it, because we don't want it to look blurry. Even if we have some depth of field going on where the camera is focused more on the face, and then as we get closer to, or farther away from the face, so toward the edges, it gets to be just a tad out of focus. I still want some of that effect going on, but for the most part, I want it to be a bit more defined where it doesn't look blurry. Oop, accidentally merged the layers together. That's done out of habit. Because typically I would probably just draw right on top of it, but since I want you guys to be able to go into the PSD and be able to draw at or look through it if you want to, I'm going to keep them on separate layers. So you can start to see the difference that we got going here. And then I'm going to take that same technique that we were just doing and apply it to the other side. This is where I'm starting to think of how the hair strands are going to be kind of falling on the outside of the head. Now when I do this, I'm still going to be using my soft brush, but I'm going to keep it very small, and I'm going to work it in. So it's not just a single like swoosh of the brush and then I'm done. I'm really treating it and thinking about the way that the hair is falling and making it look very much according to the way that I feel the hair would fall based on the hair length, the style that she has, how unkempt or kempt it is. So usually I'll start with just basic curls going into the head, and then I'll work with ones that might be a bit more loose. So then I'll play with hair strands that go outside. Because the way that you work with hair is either hair is pointing, or is the direction of the hair is going toward the head or away from the head. So the best thing you could do is get a mixture of that, where initially it goes away from the head, but then it curves back into the head. But that doesn't mean it's true for every character. Like some characters' hair will be wild and unkempt, and it'll have a completely different direction than what we're doing for Cecilia. But for this character, since it's supposed to be kind of unkempt but kind of playful in a way, that's the kind of technique that I would use, where it's a lot of going out and then have it curve back into the head. Because it's still soft. We're getting those rounded shapes, and that's what we're kind of focusing to continue throughout not only the hair, but the entire character, really. So now let's get near the top of the head. You can still see all I'm doing is I'm grouping those shapes out. And then in areas where it parts like this, I really want to make sure I have somewhat of a defined edging to it. Because it really shows like this is the area where the hair parts into two different collective areas. And the farther that you're away from the front of the face, usually it tends to be a bit more out of focus, depending on if that's the kind of look you're going for. And for Cecilia, I want the back of the head to be almost the least in focus out of all the areas. So I'm not worrying too much about how in focus those strands in the hair, the strands of hair in the back are. All right, so now from here, I should have a pretty good sense of where my basic groupings are, and then from here, it's just shading them accordingly. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing that on one more new layer. And since these are my hair colors, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my color picker now. I'm going to do it a bit higher in value, and I think I'm going to have it be around the same saturation, but I'm going to bend it toward yellow. And this goes back to when I was talking about bending your lighting towards yellows and your shadows towards your purples, or more importantly, your warms and your cool colors. This is what I'll do for hair, and then I'll lay out where I want the basic shines to be. So I'm still not refining it with a small brush yet, and that's important to note because I really do like to save the refinements of doing those hair impressions for the very end. Because right now we're just giving the hair some more value, more shape to it. All right, so now from here is probably where I would go in and start doing the individual strands. But first, let's take a look at what that layer did. You can see how when I added it, it started to give the form to the hair. And then as we make this new layer, this is where we're really going to give the impression that it's hair, not just some shape of form. So pretty much what I like to do is I like to play with the contrast between the lighter color that I'm laying out right now against the darker hues of the hair. And you can see how if you do just kind of quick, not hashing strokes, but just straight strokes that are in the same direction of the hair. And this is something that I should mention more, is that you want to work in the direction of your hair. So if your hair is pretty much going in a downward slant, you want your brush strokes to be following that downward strand with it. So I'm going to make sure that I'm following that simple rule as I draw the hair on Cecilia here. And the best thing is when you have a single strand of light hair that falls over like a darker strand or one of those backlit, or lack of lighting I should say, in the back area of the hair. You can see how the lighter strands of hair really do pop out against that. So pretty much have like a central line in mind of where the lighting would hit. So mine would be right there, and draw your strokes across that line and trying to push the hardest down in the middle of where that line was. And then here, this area will be the main focus of the hair. So since this is where most of the lighting will be focused, I want to make sure that I do a nice job of laying down the brush strokes. If I add too much of this color, she might start to look like she's a blonde character. So I gotta be careful with not adding too much shine that it actually takes away from the natural color of the hair. I want the head to be more defined up against this hairline here. And a lot of concept art is just done through problem solving. So when you're working on something, and this is something that is actually more important than just the Cecilia course, this is like just saying in general, concept artists are generally problem solvers. So they'll look at something, decide how to execute it, and then go ahead and do it. And in this case, we're looking at hair, and we're deciding how to make it look like realistic hair, well, in an animated sense, and then think of how we can use our tools that are provided through Photoshop to create that. And I think it's important to note that if you're doing something that is taking you a very long time, really maybe just take a break, stop, and think about what you're doing and if there's a simpler way to do it. Because more likely than not there is. It's just that you're overworking yourself because you're working through a technique that you know that works, but it's not very time efficient. All right, so now I'm going to flip it, see what it looks like from the other side. And then lastly, I'm just going to add some very, very light highlights to the hair. So I'm just grabbing a really saturated color that's high in value, and I'm just kind of edging off, or not even edging off, I'm just laying on top of that line that I was talking about. I'm just lightly grazing it to really give the impression that this hair is falling over this head. And it has a value and a shape to it. And this is also where it's kind of fun to draw the individual strands. So I don't like drawing individual strands when you're laying out the hair on a larger scale, but when you're in this part of the detailing, this is when you can have fun laying out like individual smaller strands to just give it some more detail. Just make sure your brush is very small, and that way you're not creating these really larger strands that you're not going for. You're going for like almost not so much individual strands, but almost to the point where they could be considered individual strands. And the last thing that I'm going to go through is, and let's see if I could, I'm going to go ahead and put the hair layers in a group here. There we go. And I'm going to merge that with the Cecilia head. And there's a reason for that. So I still have all the hair layers in that group, and you can still go ahead and look through it if you want. But the reason I like to merge all the layers together is so I can start to use either the liquify, or in this case, we're going to be using the smudge tool. And I don't like using the smudge tool to draw the hair on, because then I think the hair can look a bit too smudgy per se, but in this case, since I want to give that back hair some sense of like strands that are falling, not in like a complete straight line like it is right now. So I just like to push the hair, and I'll push the hair in both directions so it doesn't look like it just pulled down. You want to make sure that you're getting some of those, some of that white going up into the hair as well. For this one, you can push kind of hard. Like you can really, if your strength isn't at 100%, you should be able to push rather hard and you'll get that nice effect. And then I'll do it for the strands in front as well, without overdoing it. Because a lot of artists tend to use a smudge tool and they work with it wonderfully, but then there's times where there's areas of the hair that looks like it's just smudged. So like this is a good example where on her right, on this side, on the right here, it looks all right, but then on the left side, it looks like it's over smudged. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that, because then it just looks like the point where it doesn't look like hair, but it looks like the hair's been smudged and it doesn't look accurate at all. And I'm going to actually grab my eraser tool and erase some of that and then just redo it. Because if you pull on the hair too much, then you'll start pulling the colors down, and you want to be careful with not overdoing that as well, because then you'll really start to make it look like it's been over smudged. All right, and there we go. So that is the way that I would treat hair for doing something like Cecilia. And if I wanted to do extra detailing, I would probably grab the dark color hair again, and then go in and like edge off those groupings that we have, give them more of a defined shadow, without overdoing it, of course, but just enough where it really does give the hair more of a form and shape. Because that's the whole focus of doing hair, is trying to reiterate the shaping and the form of the hair. And this is one of those ways that you can do it without having to draw each individual strand. So in the next tutorial, it's going to be our last one, where we're going to be talking about refining the outfit and then doing minor polishing touches to call this one done.